Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This acknowledgement was brought to you by calgaryfoundation.org. Now, back to the podcast.
Let's talk a little bit. So,
okay.
Yeah, how's your week been?
My week has been pretty good. Busy, I work in marketing at a nonprofit, and it's just a very busy job, basically.
I'd imagine
going on.
Yeah.
So it's fun, but it's like a nonprofit that has several nonprofits in the umbrella. So I run like several social media accounts, and I'm always out taking pictures, like sending all these emails, and we're a little bit like short-staffed right now. So it's a lot, but I really like my coworkers. So that's cool.
Yeah. Is it just you?
Well, it's just me in marketing, which is wild, but it's not just me at the nonprofit. Lots of people work there.
Yeah, I would hope that you're not the only one in that one nonprofit. Oh my God, that's so much work.
Yeah, I don't think that would be physically possible.
Yeah, like running a podcast and your own nonprofit company. Oh wow, that's impressive.
Could not do it.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hey there.
Bonjour. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Just go to fucking therapy.
If I develop Sims, delete the channel.
We need to start a revolution.
And you know what? I'm going to say it.
All of them are fucking idiots.
25 is technically you.
Just say your morning routine.
And that's fucking it. Excuse me? Where are my Grishas at? Yo.
I'd like you to rephrase that, Sam.
Is my guilty boner. Like, you'll attract the kind of people that are into serial killers. That's still bigger than a city.
It's more than one planet.
Percy Jackson is Greek mythology fanfiction.
Boneless. Oh my God.
I want no. Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Today, I have Kara Killinger of the Telescope Podcast. Can I get you to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Hey. So, Kara is it Kara or Kara? I'm so sorry.
It's Kara.
Kara? Sorry.
Yes.
So, Kara Killinger of the Telescope Podcast. So, Kara is the host of, like I said, the Telescope Podcast, which is well, you know what? I'll let her explain it.
Okay, yeah. So the Telescope Podcast is a literary podcast for young writers specifically. And basically every episode, a new writer will share their story, read a story in its entirety or a piece of poetry or nonfiction, and then I will interview them briefly afterwards. And that is the entire podcast. So it's really a platform for young writers ages 15 to 25 to share and discuss their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she has been doing that for a while, I think. And as eager as I am to talk about that, first we should talk with Kara, actually. So, as from one creative writer to another, typically what I like doing on these podcasts, whenever we have guests on or whenever it's new people coming on, basically is just to talk about the creative writing origins and getting started as a creative person. Like I say on the InkGuild Podcast that, it originally started as a creative writing podcast, but really it's just become more than that. But at the heart of it, we are still creative writers and creative people in general. So let's talk with you about your creative writing or your creative origins, I guess. So how did you become a writer?
I feel like I've just always been, it's just, I don't know, I'm like one of those people, I've just always wanted to be a writer. And even like when I was a kid, I would play pretend with my friends, which everyone does, but I'd be like, I want to remember this story. So I would write it all out on the bus. Even before I was like, I want to be a writer, I was just like, I don't want to forget this cool story that me and my friends were like role playing, for 5 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, and like, being a little kid writing your little picture books, illustrating them, it's just always been something that's been important to me.
So yeah, it started out pretty young. Yeah, I would imagine. I think, yeah, for me, and I guess because this is also going out to your audience as well as mine, just to kind of like refresh my creative origin for those who might not know. I basically knew I wanted to become a creative writer when I did a school assignment in around fourth grade 4. And it was basically just, hey, write a dream that you had, or write about a dream that you had recently. And I wrote about my toys coming to life, except, oh my God, they're attacking the city. This isn't great. This isn't Toy Story. So like ever since then, like despite me knowing very little about how to like keep plot consistent, keep my ideas contained, like it was so fun. And I remember like just that sticking with me. And to kind of bounce off of your story, when you were role playing with your friends, like were there any kind of like influences to that? Like were you guys just making stuff up, or like were you doing like fan fiction kind of thing? Were you like reenacting characters from Harry Potter or something? Like did you have any influences?
It was pretty much all just made up. I feel like it was kind of in the era of like when we watched a lot of like Disney Channel and like, I don't know, like Princess Diaries movies. And so there was a lot of like pretending to be in high school and, when we were like much younger than high school, obviously. And like, oh, the mean girls are like being mean to us and we're blah, blah, blah. But then there was like a lot of like princess stuff. It's kind of like what you would expect from like little girls just making up stories.
Mm-hmm. So it was that kind of like early, like I don't want to say like early 2000s kind of like Disney media, I think. Like
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, those were some of your earliest influences.
I think so. Yeah, and like I don't know, like High School Musical, just silly stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's silly. Like I grew up on that stuff too, so
I mean, I still love it.
Yeah.
It's not like a serious thing, but it has a special place in my heart for sure.
Yeah. Did you have any other early influences when you were starting to become a creative writer?
Yeah, I feel like you mentioned Harry Potter earlier. I feel like Harry Potter was the first series that I was like really obsessed with. And I also at sort of like the same time was into like the Narnia books. I had this, I got the giant, I don't know like why I did this, but instead of like getting the books one by one, I found this book at the library that was like all of them. It was like a huge book. I was like in 4th grade and I just like, would be sitting on my chair with this giant book. So yeah, like Harry Potter and Narnia were like really big when I was starting out.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure I wrote some like, I'm pretty sure I wrote some like fan fiction too before I knew what fan fiction was. Mm-hmm. I was like, I'm going to write a story. And the story was just like, kids go to magic school. It was just Harry Potter. But, when you're young, you're like, I have a very original idea. Like, I have to write this down.
Yeah. As a kind of quick thing about it, because like now I'm thinking about Narnia, because Narnia was like one of my favorite like series growing up. You started with the books or did you start with the movies?
I started with the books. I watched the movies as well. Yeah.
I definitely started with the movies. I like, just the big budget thing. Like, despite me being a writer in the like as a kid, and like still, I always ended up like watching my media instead of reading it. And Narnia, I think for me was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then when I found out that like the first movie wasn't the first book, I was like, what?
Mind blown.
Whoa, I didn't realize just how extensive these books go. And then I actually read the whole series and I'm like, I love it. It's one of my like, it definitely is like a childhood influence for me too. I think same thing with Narnia. Like same thing with Harry Potter. Like I never read Harry Potter growing up, but like I know a lot of people did. And like I did an interview recently, or I did an interview for the season of the podcast as well with Ganja the Wordsmith from TikTok. He also was very influenced by Harry Potter, and I think, yeah, just the thing about like Harry Potter being like a big influence for everybody is non-surprising at this point. Like, what was it like for Harry Potter for you? Like, was it the magic? Was it was it the fact that like everyone was fairly close in age to you? Like they were all still fairly young, so you could see yourself in that situation? Or
yeah, I don't. It's hard to be like, oh, it was this one thing, because it's just such a good story. Like all of the without any aspects of it, it like wouldn't be the same. I think that like escapism aspect is just really fun. I had a really like good childhood, I think, but like at the same time, it would have been cool if I could like go to wizard school, like just go into this other world where like you're, and like the chosen one aspect, I think, is always fun. Like for a kid, oh, you're like the chosen one who's going to save everyone. It's just like, it's very fun to read about, like, what if you could just find this new thing out about yourself and you're actually like so much more special than you could have ever imagined. That aspect is like that fantasy escapism thing is fun to read about for a kid.
Absolutely, yeah. Like I think that resonates with like a lot of people that I know who have talked about that series, where it's like being able to see yourself in that situation, and yeah, like you said, escapism. And I think like self-inserting, I think that's also a good way of putting it too. Like just finally being able to see yourself in that situation and letting your imagination go crazy, basically. Yeah, I think those are good ways to kind of start out with like influence wise. But like now that I bring up starting out, let's talk about how like those early days of being a creative writer. So like when you were first starting to write your stories, like did you know, I this sounds like kind of a bit insensitive, so I'm sorry, but like, did you know what you were really doing, or were you just kind of like jotting words down on paper and seeing what, like, if it sticks or not, or if it's stick or not? Oh my God, I don't know how to put it.
I think once you start like reading books, which is like pretty early for anyone, you start reading books at like kindergarten. But like you're like, oh, like if I'm gonna write this down, like I might as well like have chapters. So I remember specifically I had this tiny book that I would like take on the bus and I would like write in like pencil. I still have it. It's like very faded now. And I would just be like chapter 1, and all the stories were very like the fairy went to the, I don't know. I think I didn't know fan fiction existed, but I was kind of writing it anyway. I knew I was writing fantasy. And I think I always thought I was writing books. Like, I don't really think I knew that like short stories existed, that form existed. And also when you're really young, like you read picture books too. So you're like, a book is like 100 words. So I was like writing books, and, a chapter of the book would be like a paragraph in like the earliest things that I wrote. And then like, as I got older, like to middle school and stuff, I became really into the idea of like actually writing like a fantasy novel, which I sort of miss that because I don't quite have that ambition anymore. Like I mostly write literary fiction, like short stories. And I'm like, okay, maybe I can do this. But like when I was 14, I was like, I'm going to write this fantasy novel. Like I'm going to write a whole novel. And I never finished it, but I really had like a notebook that I just carried around everywhere. And I wrote like over 100 pages of just like a fantasy novel that I never let anyone read. And I like went on baby name websites a lot, like so much. When I was like 14 and 15, I spent like hours on, I specifically remember this website called like Nameberry. For some reason, I was just that's like,
a classic. Yeah.
I was just like, what are these characters going to be named? It's like, it's so important. And just was kind of writing. I don't even remember what like the title of the novel was, but it was kind of like this girl it was a little bit cliche, I was 14, but a girl in an orphanage in a very like oppressive monarchy, sort of like dystopian, like maybe it's after the collapse of our current world, but now there's just like this monarchy in this like one city, and they don't know that other cities exist. And this girl finds out that before the current king like took over, she was the princess, and somebody just got her out before basically her parents were killed, and this new king guy could become the king, and they thought she was dead. She was actually in this orphanage, and then she like has to escape the city, and then she finds out that this other like rebel city exists, and then she's hanging out there, and then she finds out she has magic powers, and obviously there's a romance side plot that's very important. And I was 14, so I was like, this kissing scene it's very important. Everything leads up to this, and these two characters like kiss in the woods, very important. And I never actually finished it. I got really frustrated with it and stopped, but I did write over 100 pages. I spent hours on that in middle school. So that was like, and then in high school, I actually found out that fan fiction did exist, and I wrote fan fiction with my friend. But I was also consistently working on a different novel that also never worked out, and it was called 29 Adventures, and it was realistic fiction. It was about this really cool girl named Allie who like moves to town, and she has these 29 adventures that she wants to complete with this guy who already lives in the town, who she like makes friends with. But this guy's like, who is this girl and why does she have this list of adventures? And it was never really fully fleshed out. But I did do National Novel Writing Month when in like 2013, I think, with that novel. And I like won it. I got all 50,000 words, and I have never shared that with anyone, and I never will. But it was a good exercise in like, I guess, like discipline. And it was real. I felt like so proud of myself that month, that like November of 2013, when I was just writing 1,667 words a day or whatever. And I think like all of these things that I've never shared and that I probably never will share, like have made me a much better writer and have prepared me to like write the things that I'm working on now.
Yeah. So a lot of, I guess, to not backtrack a whole lot, but just like kind of going at what you said and how a lot of like your early stuff was longer form. Like, yeah, I think that's for a lot of people, like you have so much ideas and so much creativity to kind of work off of that. Like you can't really help but write longer stories. Like I certainly couldn't stop doing that because like, yeah, like I was a very imaginative kid and just going off of so many different influences and just not being able to contain my ideas. Like I'm still a long form writer, and I think I talked about that on your podcast, but just like, yeah, I think when it comes to like longer form, and I know that you're familiar now with shorter form writing, what made you want to transition into shorter form?
I think it was just being in college and like being in creative writing workshops. And sometimes like I was an English major also, so we like would study short stories, but we'd also read a lot of novels in English classes. But like in college, like creative writing workshops, like fiction workshops, you're always like writing short stories. And I also kind of realized like none of the long form stuff that I was writing in middle school and high school like ever actually got finished to where I could like, you know, really move forward with it and move toward, you know, being comfortable enough to share it with people. I was like, I've always been like very secretive about not secretive, but like private. Like I don't really like people reading stuff that I don't feel like is done. I think you're the same way.
Yeah.
From what you said on my podcast, like it's just kind of like embarrassing when, you know, the stuff that you're writing is like so close to you and like it's like your soul, but at the same time it's like not.
Yeah.
It's like not what you imagined it to be. So it's like embarrassing to show it to be. Anyway, so
yeah, it's just like, it's that whole thing of like, am I right? Are you writing a story? Yeah. Can I read it? Absolutely not.
Exactly. That's why I'm not like always like I try to I've been a lot better about writing like pretty frequently, but I'm still not like, hey everyone, like I'm writing, let me talk about my writing, because then people are just gonna want to read it, and it's like you really can't. Like I don't even know like when you can, but like not now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like a big reason, other than just being in creative writing workshops where we had to write short stories, is just like I want to get to that point where I have something that I feel very good about that I want to share with people. And I eventually like would love to go back and like write a novel again, like, or like try to write a novel. But like first I want to get to the point where I can write like a good story, you know, like 5,000 words or something. And like share it with people and feel confident about it, because I don't want to forever be in the place of not sharing my work, being super private about it. I mean, I really would like to share it and there are so many avenues to get things published just online. So I'm really working towards that at this point.
Yeah. I don't know what it is about, like, I think young writers, especially who are, you know, like you and I, just so nervous about wanting to share their work. I've always called it writer's anxiety. I don't know if that's the right term for it. There probably is like an accurate term for it out there, but yeah, like same for me. I was deathly afraid to like really commit to showing people writing. I'm kind of the opposite. Like I've shared a lot of my stories a lot, but when it comes to like the novel that I'm currently working on, Xeno, which I've spoken on briefly on your podcast and on my podcast, like loads, like I only share sections of it because that is the one that I think I want to be absolutely perfect. Like, you know, I've said it on your podcast, but like I don't want to submit like any drafts unless I'm speaking about it, because just even if it's just a draft, I know willingly that it's just a draft, but I still do not want to submit it until it is absolutely the story that I want. Right. And obviously coming with changes and stuff. But I've already accounted for that. If it's not a story that I'm willing to submit anywhere, then it's not a story that I'm going to talk about. And just dealing with that kind of like anxiety. I feel like when there's just something that you really, really care about, then it's different. Like for me, like because most of my focus is on Xeno. However, I do end up writing shorter pieces anyway. It's shorter pieces, I think, have always just been like a one and done hobby thing, I think, for me. Like if I have so much creativity, but I don't necessarily want to or can't channel that into my book, then a short story pops out. And like I've considered bringing my short story places, but really like it's not as careful as I've been with my story. And again, that's just due to writer's anxiety. Like I want to make sure that I'm confident and I know where I'm at as a writer before I even fully commit to like sending it. And this is coming from someone who hasn't finished it yet. Like it's hard. Like it's so hard to finish a longer form, and I think maybe even shorter form too. Like, but yeah, I guess tangent aside, I wanted to kind of close off the opening, or I guess this kind of like first half of like just getting to know you by discussing support systems. So whenever we've introduced people on the podcast, I think especially early on, we were talking about like who were there supporting us when we were first starting out and who was still supporting us now. So let's get into that with you. So what was your support system like as a creative writer?
Well, I think like as a little kid, and even like as a middle schooler, I didn't like really have much support other than my parents being like, oh, cool, you're writing a novel. Like that's cool. Which was nice of them, but I didn't let them read it like ever. They're just like, this girl always has her giant notebook with her. Interesting. But I think as time has gone on, I've like found those like communities of writers. I think my first experience of that was a summer camp that I went to when I was 16, and 17. I went to it for 2 summers, and it was called Young Writers Workshop, and it was a camp that was run through the University of Virginia, and I like went to Virginia like for this camp, and it was like a utopia. Like I literally like I can't even describe it to you. It was like everyone, I don't know, everyone just like was working on, we had like writing workshops all day. That was like the main part of the camp, and you could like specialize in different things. The first year I went, I did poetry, and the second one I did fiction. And like, yeah, it was my first experience of being in like a writing workshop, and I was like, this is amazing. Like people are giving me feedback on my work, and like people don't think my work is stupid even when it's not done. And like there were all these, especially with poetry, it wasn't something that I had done a lot, and I was like learning all these new things about poetry, and everyone was writing poetry, and we would have like readings at night, and authors would come, and there were like electives where we could like learn about different things. Like there was like a feminism one, and like I don't know, like ones where we could learn about different genres and like music, and it was just on this beautiful, like it was on the campus of Sweetbriar College, which is this all women's like liberal arts school, and it was just on these like rolling fields in Virginia, and the weather was beautiful. Anyway, I just like, it was just like one of the coolest, it's still like one of the coolest things I've ever done was go to that camp. So I think that was my first experience of being like, oh, like writing doesn't have to be this like thing that you just like, you know, you're just with your notebook and you don't let anyone see it until like 10 years later when you come out and you have your novel and you can just share it and people will like it. It's like the process of writing can also be a community where you like support each other, and you can kind of like share things that aren't quite done yet. And going to readings for the first time, it's like so cool. And just like everybody took each other's, like, I feel like people's work wasn't like amazing because we were like in high school, but like everybody took everybody's work seriously. And like, you know, we worked really hard on the stuff that we wrote, and we were really proud when we were able to share it. And then there were all the counselors were like writers who were like either in college or like getting their master's degrees or whatever, and who we could like look up to as people that like we might be able to become in the future. So that was that had a really big impact on me going to that camp, and just seeing that communities like that could exist. And then in college, I honestly wish I would have been a little bit more involved in like the creative writing community. But I was very involved in student journalism. I was the features editor of my student newspaper.
Respect to that.
Yeah, and it was a lot of work, and it was really stressful. I think I must have worked like 40 hours a week for that stupid paper. Like, and like they like actually paid us, but they didn't pay us like,
oh, lucky. Nice.
Like if you did the math, it like wasn't minimum wage. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they did. It's cool that they paid us, but it was like probably worked out to like $2 an hour or something.
That's still money.
It's still money. Yeah, I tell people from other students, they're like, "You got paid." I'm like, I did get paid. Yeah.
The shock on my face when I realized that you could get paid for a student paper while still being in the university. Student
journalism, it's absurd that they don't pay student journalists. That is so much work. But yeah, I mean, even though technically it wasn't creative writing, you know, it was a place where I like, you know, I wrote all the time. I like edited a lot. I, you know, I had to manage my team of reporters and tell them what to write about and help them make their stories better and give them tips and advice. And I met so many I like made all these like really strong friendships in the student newspaper. And I think it also helped me, you know, like obviously I interview people now for my podcast and honestly quite often for my marketing job, interestingly. So it helped set me up for like kind of what I do now.
Yeah.
That was really cool. And then like right now I feel involved in a writing community just because of the podcast basically that I'm making. And there's so much warmth and love on Twitter, which so unexpected. I used to only have an Instagram account for my podcast, and then I went on Twitter. I was like, oh, this is where all the lit mags are, and they're all fun, and they're all run by these like young people who aren't making any money, like just like me. It's a very cool space, and there's so many writers, and not all of them are like, I don't know. You think of the writing community and it's like, oh, am I only allowed to be in it when I've like had all these things published, or I'm getting an MFA or what have you? It's like, I have no credentials. I have, but I still feel like a part of this community, and it's really cool.
Yeah. I just realized just like how similar our stories are, because like I also did my degree in university is journalism, and
awesome.
It's like what you said when it comes to, it might not be creative writing, it still teaches you like a lot, especially when you want to be like when you want to expand with writing, because like writing, I think nowadays has become so much more than just like a book, right? Like you can take you can take writing and like obviously turn it into like into like movies, TV shows, but like writing accounts for a lot more than that. Like there's audio stories, there are podcasts, like writing has become so much more than just like a single form nowadays. And in itself, just journalism teaches you so much. Like it teaches you how to be, it teaches you stuff like word count, more kind of, trying to keep your ideas concise and like what to say, like who to, or like what to say, what, like how much of it should you say, like where to kind of put your opinion in, when not to. And like on top of that, like it also teaches you a bunch of other stuff. Like my degree has taught me how to do this, right? Like it's taught me how to do a podcast and like kind of go from there. And like I think going into, I think something else you said when it comes to like creative writing communities and stuff like that, I think is a huge support system. Like that as a support system is huge. Like it's so relieving, and it's amazing to be surrounded by other like creative people, I think, like, because then you just have people who understand. Like I've said that before on like numerous different episodes of the InkGuild podcast, but just like as a community in and of like within ourselves, like us 12 are very, we each have our own writing forms. We've each been writing at like for however long, but like at the end of it, we're all still creative writers. We understand writer's block. We understand, we understand what jargon means. We understand like all of these like really obscure literary devices, and we know how to use it. And that like is a thing that I'm very thankful for, because like my entire life I was just like, oh my god, I am surrounded by people who don't know creative writing as much as I do, so I sound like an idiot whenever I try to like go off on my tangents. But just now that we have our like, now that us as the Ink Guild, we have each other, and we're trying to tap into not just into creative writing communities, but like a more general community itself, because it's not just a creative writing podcast anymore. It's more like a podcast by creative writers. Like we're just trying to essentially be ourselves and like be as honest as possible when it comes to our things, because just like I said, writing has become like such a big thing, and it's become like more than one thing, really. Like it's more than a novel, it's more than a short story, it's so much, I think. And I think because writing in itself is like so multifaceted and so vast, it must be really interesting the kind of stories you get on Telescope. So let's talk about Telescope. When did you start it?
I started it in March 2020. So I started it as I was a double major in college, English and communication. And for the communication major at my university, you had to do a capstone project, which is, I feel like a lot of people dreaded that, but like it was a big draw of the major for me. I was like, oh, I get to do like a big project that like I get support from a bunch of different professors and like, you know, have a whole semester to just work on one project. That just sounded like so cool to me. So that was a big reason why I just randomly decided to add that major. So yeah, it was just a school project. Basically, I was inspired by the New Yorker's podcast, The Writer's Voice, which the whole podcast is just a writer reading their own story. Like there's not an interview component. There isn't really any sound editing. It's literally just the writer reading their own story, but there's still like something very magical and like intimate about a writer reading their own story. It's just very nice to listen to. I'm super into audio and like audiobooks and consuming stories like in that way.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, like what if I could make this, but it's like with, you know, people who are more like me, like just not published in the New Yorker, like younger, like sort of getting their start. So yeah, I had a whole semester to just work on that project to get some feedback from people, from like fellow students and from different professors who worked at my university. So it was just I had already planned to do it. It was just a coincidence that it happened to align with like the beginning of the pandemic and things. And I remember writing a panicked email to my advisor. I was like, should I even do this project? Like, I don't know if this is going to work out. Like, cause I was going to have access to the, there's like a radio station at my university and I was going to have access to their like audio equipment. But she was like, no, you should just do it. You can definitely do this from home. Like, no worries. Cause I had moved, you know, back into my parents' house because the university was shut down everything was crazy at that time. But this podcast was like a good way to keep connected, especially because I graduated a few months after starting it. And I was like, what am I going to do with my life? But I still have this podcast to work on. So
yeah, I
process.
think definitely. Yeah. I think the same thing for me. So when I started the InkGuild podcast, I think I told you, like, I'm pretty sure I already told you the story on your podcast, but I guess it's kind of a refresher. I was on a phone call late at night with Gabe, who is one of the prominent people on my podcast. And he, like, I just remembered, like, you know, there's so much chemistry with this conversation. Like, you know, we kind of, like, we were talking about video games, but like we were talking specifically about like characters and like character motivations, I think, and just like some of the goofy mechanics that came with the video games. And I'm like, yeah, about a month into the lockdown and the pandemic, I was like, man, why don't we start a podcast? So we talked it over with our Discord group. We came up with the name The Ink Guild and kind of went from there. I used whatever communication skills I had learned from my degree and took on the reins as the, I guess, executive producer. So yeah, that gave me something to do, and it kind of gave everybody something to, or it kind of gave a lot of other people other things to do, because like anything to kind of focus on, like what you had said before, like, and how you kind of started. Like for me, I had no idea how to do this, like how to do any of this when we started. Like, just, I knew what we wanted to talk about, I knew how to record, and that was about it. Like learning how, like, guidance and stuff, like eventually, I guess also coincidentally, I was able to make I was able to make the podcast part of my work term, which in my university is basically like, you know, you have to intern or you have to work for a company for a certain amount of time to kind of get that experience and like set you up. I didn't have that many opportunities, so I kind of just coincidentally had one with the InkGuild podcast. So I was able to work with alumni and local radio to help make the podcast as good as, or like, certainly a lot better, but also just confidently more my own, because now that, you know, now with the guidance in mind, and like now that I've been doing this for quite a while too, like just it's so fun still, and like it's so fun to like hear so many different perspectives, and like whether it is creative writing related or whether we're just talking about our favorite piece of media. But back to Telescope, actually, I want to learn about like just the specifics of it. So what is it? So whenever someone submits to the podcast, you would typically, are you okay if I talk about like the process a little bit, or is that like
totally.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, there's writers who submit to you, you kind of pick out their story, and then you have them read on, and then you do the interview. I really like that format. Like, I really like that. It's a format that encourages so many different writers, especially young writers, to kind of like share their story. I really do kind of like that idea. So if I may ask, why did you decide to stick with that format?
I guess like if it works, it works. I don't know. The goal when I created the podcast, especially because it was inspired by this one that was like so simple, like the Writer's Voice New Yorker podcast, so simple. It's almost like not even a podcast. It's just like someone reading a story. I just wanted to prioritize the story over everything. Like I think people should listen to the entire episode because I put a lot of work into it. Mm-hmm. But like if somebody just wanted to listen to a story, they could not listen to the interview part. And I wanted to keep the interview like I like going a bit beyond just having somebody read their story, because I like getting to know people, and I think like my audience is interested, you know, like, oh, like where do they go to school? What are some of their writing goals and stuff? Sometimes it's just fun, like after you've heard a story, you get to hear a little bit more about the author, like a little about the author page or something. Mm-hmm. So I just think, I always try to prioritize the story, but then like I also want to talk to the writer and just learn a little bit about them.
Yeah, like to kind of like dissect that a little bit, to focus on the story itself. I've only listened to a couple. Like there was mine. Hopefully that doesn't make me sound very stuck up, but like, yeah, I listened to my episode. And again, for those listening, I read or basically a flash fiction piece of mine called Somewhere at the Edge of the Universe. And I didn't notice this until I listened to the full episode, but I noticed that you added music to mine, which is great. I really like that. That was a really good touch. And just like the way that authors like collaborate, I think like it's in that kind of example where I'm like really appreciative of the fact that like, you know, writers have so many different interpretations for things, because it's like I didn't ever imagine adding any kind of like backdrop to it, and I think the music really helped with it. So finger snaps. It's hard to hear with this kind of microphone. It's a very or maybe it is, I don't know, but just when it comes to the stories themselves, like have there ever been situations where you're like, man, I really want to add music, or like, you know, like I see something in this sort of thing? Does that make any sense?
You mean like immediately when I read it, if I'm like, oh, I want to add music? Yeah.
Like I want to see if I can like add some special touch that would make it like really cool.
It's pretty rare that I don't think I've actually ever thought about that when I'm first reading a story. I'm just trying to see like if I like the story and if it seems like a good fit for the podcast, like when someone emails it to me. And then like as I'm editing the episode, I always put like some sort of intro music and outro music, and then sort of like music between the end of the story and the beginning of the interview. And I think in the case of your story, I just wanted to extend the music a little bit more. It like so it gradually built and then faded. So it ended up being a significant part of the story because it was a flash fiction piece that had the music. So it's just outro music, but I wanted to like extend it a little bit more because it just seemed to be working. And I don't think I knew from the beginning that I was going to add music, and I don't know if it necessarily like makes the story better or whatever, but it just, when I found that music online, I was like, oh, this definitely works for the tone of this. And then
I only ask because just like I really thought that was a really cool idea, like collaborating between like, you know, like as a decision that you made to kind of like help enhance the piece. That's what I think is the beauty about like young writers kind of working together. Like you get so many different ideas from what you've you kind of like get so many different ideas from like other creative writers your age or younger or older, and it's that kind of like learning together that makes being a young writer so fun. So if I may ask, what is something you've learned so far from doing the Telescope podcast?
Gosh, I don't know. I've gotten better and faster, I think, at audio editing, which has been good. I like to think I've gotten better at interviewing people and, you know, deciding on the best questions to ask to learn more about them. I think an interesting thing I've learned, a question that I often ask, is about people's writing routines. And I don't know if it's just because we're young or just because we're like creative, chaotic people, but no one has like a writing routine. So that made me feel better. I've learned that, like, I've asked many people about their writing routines, and I don't think I've had a single person, like everyone's pretty much, oh, I just like write when I can. And they still create this beautiful work. So I think that's been interesting. You know, you're always, as a writer, as a person, you're always like comparing yourself to other people. But, you know, everybody's just like out here trying their best and, you know, writing when they have time. Everyone has busy lives and like many demands. And, you know, people are just writing when they have time and, you know, doing what they can, and they come out with beautiful work.
Yeah. I think similar lessons that you've learned for Telescope, I've learned for the InkGuild, like, again, like better audio editing, better interviewing skills. Like, despite me knowing about some of these things beforehand, like there are some videos on our YouTube channel that I was never taught. I kind of had to teach myself that, and it was really fun doing that. Like it's really like me kind of building my own resume for myself, as well as like giving more of a platform for my friends and I to kind of like share creativity and whatnot, because like the InkGuild podcast has always been that. It's been like a way for us it's basically rephrasing, but it's just, you know, friends sharing their thoughts and finding new ways to do that, whether it is through like a podcast or through creative or other creative projects, which I'm going to keep a tight lip on because we have a few in mind. But just, it's so interesting, like how many things I've kind of like picked up along the way, and I think especially too, like a lot of things that I've picked up by myself, like I said, the video and audio editing things, like the things that I've learned, I've certainly had a good hand in, but a lot of it was self-taught. So like, what were some of the things that you've kind of picked up along the way when you were doing this, and like kind of helped build your routine for like creating an episode of Telescope?
Gosh. Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing that I've had to teach myself is just audio editing. The reason that I like have this equipment is because I also make music. It's been a really long time since I've recorded music, but that's the reason why I had to do research on what kind of audio equipment to buy and why I have this audio equipment.
You got the full
Um,
cardioid mic and everything, or you got the full like
Yes.
XLR mic and everything. Respect.
Yeah. So it was very lucky that I already randomly had audio. I didn't buy this microphone with the intent to start a podcast ever. I just bought it to record music. So it was lucky that when the pandemic hit and I didn't have access to the school's resources, that I just like had this equipment. So I've had to teach myself to use it. I edit with Adobe Audition. So
It's a good one.
I've had to teach myself all of that. I I really would love to take like a class on some of this stuff at some point because I've done like a pretty good job teaching myself, I think. But like I've never sometimes I'm just like, wow, I just like use all this equipment and I'm like editing and I'm like, I've never taken a class on this, which you don't really need to, but it's like, I wonder what it would be like to like actually have had, because I've just found like such a passion for like audio editing. It's so like calming. I find it similar to editing words in some ways where you're just like, that doesn't quite work. And it can be very tedious, especially like you said, when you're editing out like ums and stuff. Or like finding the exact moment when you want a sound to occur, like in a story. Because sometimes I add music to the background, but sometimes it's even more like sound effects. If it doesn't seem too cheesy to me, if a sound is mentioned, sometimes I'll just add like an audio version of a sound because I can and it's fun. And I use this website called freesound.org. I think it's .org, to find all of the sounds because, they're royalty free and available to use. So
shout out to royalty free artists. You guys are all wonderful people.
Free sound. I'm going to check. I think it's actually freesound.com. It's such a beautiful place. Like the fact that people are just like, oh, here's a cricket just like hanging out. I should record it and upload it for anyone to use for their creative projects just for free. And sometimes you have to give credit depending on the license that they have. Sometimes you have to give credit and sometimes you don't have to give credit at all. So just like people record like the weird, like if you're like, oh, this specific like bug or like this specific sound, like somebody's recorded it.
Yeah.
And it just like, that's just, I feel like I'm in a way like collaborating with all these people who like don't even know I exist. So that's super cool. And I've just like found such a passion for like audio. Like I already really enjoyed like podcasts and good like sound design, like, but doing it myself, it's so much fun. And like, it's been really cool to like discover a love for something where it's like, I haven't taken a class. I haven't like, no one like sat down and taught me to do this stuff. I just like kind of learned and it's been really cool.
Yeah, I agree. Like I was going to say, like, it's so interesting and I think so rewarding the fact that like you kind of do all of this yourself in a way, like obviously for you and in my case too. Like in my case, no one taught me how to run this podcast. No one, like I've been taught like how to like do levels and stuff for audio. Like I've been told to like here's what you should be aiming for so that your mic doesn't scream. But just most of the things that I've learned along the way has been it's ignited my own kind of love and passion for audio editing too, because I feel the same way. Like it is so rewarding, I think, when an episode comes out great because it's by your own standard. Like
right.
You like and that's the thing, like it's the standards that you set for yourself that kind of makes it fun, because like you know how to do these episodes, but at the same time you continuously raise your own standard, right? Like, and you know, I don't want to speak for you, but for me, just that's how it is with the InkGuild. Like we every single time just find new ways of like discussing topics and like being more comfortable on air and stuff. Like we all continuously just set our own standards and raise our own bars basically for how we do things. And that is something that I think we really only could have done ourselves. Like there was, you know, guidance and stuff aside, just like it's being able to be your own boss essentially that makes like being not just being like a, content creator basically, but like being a young writer, like you kind of thing, like being young writers are sweet. Like it's cool. It's fun to like determine and set your own boundaries, learn your own rules, and try, fail whenever you can, but ultimately, like, I think so long as you have the passion for it, it's rewarding no matter what.
Definitely. And I feel like even though like you really can't do it without a community, like community is really important, and especially
course,
for like motivation. There is also an aspect of like writing, which also kind of applies to like making your own podcast, which is just like you have control of every aspect of this piece of art. I've thought about like other art forms, like film, for example, is just something that I obviously like consume, but like I don't really have an interest in being like involved in like creating it. The way that I do with like other art forms, I'm just like, I'm good. Like I don't really like want to make a film. It sounds really cool, but I just like I have so many other things other art forms that I want to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like for me, at least, like one of the reasons that I wouldn't want to make a film is because I would have to give up control. Like film is so collaborative, which is so cool, but they're just like, at the end of the day, it's like almost not yours, because it's really like so much of the art belongs to the actors and like the way things are portrayed, or like the set designers. Like you can't feasibly do all that yourself. Maybe like in certain circumstances, if it's a short film for a university or something.
Yeah.
But then in writing, you're really like, like you said, like being your own boss, you're controlling every aspect of it. You probably need to have someone read it at some point and like tell you what's wrong with it, but it's still like your story, like all of the characters are like portrayed by you, like as the writer. And yeah, it's the same thing with a podcast where you're just like I'm the one, like I answer all the emails. I like, design the graphics for all the marketing for the show. And it's like, it's a lot of work, but it's very like, I'm just like a control freak. Like it's very fun to be in charge of every aspect of something and not have to like explain it to anyone. You just, of course, at the same time, this podcast specifically, like my podcast wouldn't exist without other people's stories. So like in a way it like belongs to everyone, but I don't know. It's cool having that, like that level of control. I guess.
Yeah. Like, I think, I'm starting to like realize too now that like podcast creation is just another way of like telling a story. And really like, you have characters, you have people to work with, you have like editors and stuff. And like ultimately still though, it is still very much your vision. And I like, even though I collectively share mine with, or even though I collectively share the InkGuild's vision with the other 12, it's rewarding when an episode turns out great the way that we like it. And though it is still within a small audience nowadays for us, just like I'm still very ambitious, and I'm like wanting to make sure that if I have no control or if I have a lot of control, just I want it to be good. And a lot of our episodes I'm very proud of. So yeah, I think likewise, like you, like when it comes to more, I think like heavier collaborative media like movies and stuff, like I'd be very picky. I've said on podcasts before, sometimes very vulgarly, but just when it comes to creative control, it is something that like I need to have a good hand in. I don't need to have all of it. I really don't need to have all of it, because sometimes my ideas are very stupid, but just being able to be myself and show what I can offer and what my friends and I can offer, like that is pretty much, I think, what makes being a startup podcast or like a small independent podcast is rewarding. I think like we are ourselves, and that is the best thing.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions I had. Was there anything you wanted to kind of talk about that we've talked about already, or like?
No, I might do a little like, hey, shout out to everyone. You should submit to the Telescope podcast.
Of course, yeah, go do it now. Do it
advertising. Now. Okay, so if anyone wants to submit their own work to the Telescope podcast, I try to make the show every 2 weeks. So there's just a lot of episodes. I want to get as many new writers on there as possible. Submissions to the show can go to telescopepodcast@gmail.com, and you can just send the document. You can include a cover letter about yourself, but it's not necessary. Like, as long as you say, hey, here's some work, please consider it. I will read it. I will consider it. I will get back to you. It's for writers ages 15 to 25. It is poetry, fiction, nonfiction. The maximum amount of words is 5,000, but there's no minimum. And I accept just a broad range of work as long as it's creative writing. I will look at it, see if it's a good fit. And yeah, I just love meeting new people from anywhere in the world and sharing their work.
Mm-hmm. You guys should do it for our audience and for everyone who's going to be listening to this. Just do it. She's really easy to work with and it's great. As for us, I guess since we're closing off the episode, thanks everybody for listening in. I am part of the InkGuild. We are at the InkGuild on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. TikTok I use a little bit more because video creating is fun. I should be on Twitter more. That's a whole other thing. That's probably an actual thing that I probably just somewhat said live on air. But anyway, we are at the InkGuild on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. Our main home, though, is on YouTube and Spotify, where you can catch all of our episodes in full, either or. It depends on which one you like. There are some on YouTube where it has a really nice visual element. However, they're meant to just kind of be listened in at whatever order you'd like. If you want to get to know us, though, there is a certain order of the podcasts where we talk a lot about our own work. So tune in on those if you want to get to know us respectively. However, if you want to just know more about us too, we are also on thing. We also each have our own social media, so feel free to connect with us there. I think that's it for plugs. I guess as a closing segment to kind of go off something that you do on your ending, with your endings and outros. Let's have you recommend a couple stories.
Okay. Well, I do want to recommend a book because I thought you might ask me for Rex. Mm-hmm. This book, Agatha of Little Neon by Claire Luchette, is very good. And it was given to me by my friend Robin. It's about sisters, like religious sisters, and just like their, mainly Agatha, the main character, and her like thoughts about like faith and, serving. I don't know. I'm pitching it very badly, but I feel like it's such like beautiful writing about like religion and the good things about it and the bad things about it, and just like people, even the minor characters are so rich and interesting. She teaches at a school and she makes all these like interesting observations about the kids there, and she has just her own questions about like why she decided on this like sequestered religious life, and she's very involved in it in the beginning, and by the end she's like really questioning why she's there, and it's just really like rich and beautiful, and I like it a lot. So I would recommend that novel. And then I always just recommend Carmen Maria Machado. She has a memoir called In the Dream House and a short story collection called Her Body and Other Parties, and it's just amazing. The short stories are like queer horror is a good way to describe it. Some of them are sort of like fairy tales, but like when you say fairy tales, it sounds like it's going to be like, a Cinderella story, like, but she really has a very unique perspective on all of these sort of like old, it's not really fairy tales, maybe it's more of like folk tales. There's like a pandemic story in there, which is so interesting because it was written way before the pandemic. And then in the Dream House is a memoir of an abusive queer relationship that she was in for like a number of years, and just her thoughts about that, and how she hasn't really read a story about like an abusive queer relationship, because when you're like in a relationship that everyone else thinks, you might face a lot of homophobia, so you want to show everyone that actually, your life is great and everything is fine. But it's like, obviously in any type of relationship there can be bad things that happen, and the way that she writes about it is like, it's just really beautiful. Every chapter brings in like references to other things, and I don't know, it's just a really smart and like beautiful book. So I recommend both of Carmen Maria Machado's books.
Cool. I think I want to throw out a quick recommendation, actually, because you had mentioned queer fantasy. The Locked Tomb trilogy by, I forget what her name is, but specifically the story Gideon the Ninth is what I think the first book in that story. Let me do a quick Google search. I should have prepared for this. Okay, so Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I think I'm butchering her name, but like, just, it is what it is. I say queer fantasy because literally one of the first, like, on the book itself, the tagline for it is what lesbian necromancers explore a gothic palace in space. That sounds cool.
That sounds so awesome.
Yeah, like we've talked about it previously on our podcast in brief, but like apparently it's really fun, and I can't wait to read it. Like, my sister has a copy of it, and like once she's done with it, I'm gonna get onto it, and I'm so excited.
Is it like a series or just a singular book?
It's a trilogy. So there's Gideon the Ninth.
Okay, cool.
There's Harold the Ninth, and I believe there's one I believe the third book is coming out soon. I don't know when, but yeah, I'm excited for that. That's my quick recommendation for everybody. And I think that's about it. So
awesome.
Thanks, Kara, for coming on. And as for everybody listening, thank you and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.